The sky was still dark when I heard the sound of splashing. It was 5:12 a.m., and I thought maybe an animal had gotten into the pool again. But when I looked through my upstairs window, my heart dropped. A woman in a hoodie, gloves, and sunglasses, yes, sunglasses in the dark, was crouching next to my backyard pool with a big white bottle in her hand. She unscrewed the cap and started pouring thick, clear liquid into the water, slowly and deliberately, like she knew exactly what she was doing. My security camera caught her from 3 angles: the side gate, the diving board, and even a clear profile of her face as she leaned in. The label on the bottle was clear as day: acid cleaner, extremely hazardous. I couldn't breathe. That was my pool. My kids had swum in it just hours ago. If I hadn't installed those cameras last week after someone slashed my floaties, I might never have known. I reached for my phone, hand trembling, and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I kept my eyes glued to the woman. There's a woman trespassing in my backyard. She's pouring chemicals into my pool. I have it on camera. Please send someone fast. Sir, stay calm. Officers are on the way. But just then, the woman turned around and looked directly into one of the cameras and smiled. That's when I realized exactly who she was. It was Karen Davis, the HOA vice president. And what she did next made my blood run cold. She walked over to my poolside furniture and poured the rest of the acid cleaner all over it. Cut to black. 2 weeks earlier, everything was quiet. I had just moved into a peaceful neighborhood in Lakefield, Tennessee. It was the kind of place where kids played on sidewalks, dogs barked at squirrels, and everyone waved at each other on their morning jogs. The American dream, so I thought. I bought a cozy 2-story house with a good-sized backyard and an in-ground pool that my kids, Brandon and Ellie, instantly fell in love with. My wife, Kathy, was thrilled we had finally left the city noise behind. But we didn't know that behind those white picket fences and polite smiles, Karen Davis ruled everything. Karen was in her mid-50s, with short blonde hair, red lipstick that never quite stayed inside the lines, and a mouth that loved the words, HOA violation. The first time I met her, she didn't say, "Welcome to the neighborhood." She said, "You'll need to paint your fence white if you plan to keep it." I blinked. "I just moved in yesterday." She smiled coldly. "We take compliance very seriously here." I tried to be polite. "I'm not part of the HOA. The deed says this property was excluded when the subdivision was created." Her smile vanished. "That must be a mistake. Everyone's part of the HOA." "No, Karen. Not this house." From that moment on, it was war. The next week, someone threw a pile of garbage over my backyard fence. 2 days later, a note showed up on my front door in a plastic sleeve. It read, "This neighborhood values order. Please consider joining the HOA to maintain community standards." It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was the same cursive Karen used when she wrote "Merry Christmas" on the cookie tin she left at everyone's doors last year. Yes, I checked with my neighbor, Steve. Still, I let it go. I wasn't going to let someone like her push me into a corner. I added cameras around the perimeter, locked the side gates, and set up motion sensors. My home was my castle. My family was happy. That was all that mattered. Then the floaties got slashed. My son Brandon came running into the kitchen yelling, "Dad, my shark float is dead." I rushed outside, and sure enough, both his shark and Ellie's unicorn float were shredded with what looked like a knife. The plastic pieces were floating in the water like confetti. That was the final straw. I went to the police station to file a report, but without proof they said it could have been raccoons or kids. No hard evidence, sir. So I installed 4 more cameras. 2 weeks later, I caught her red-handed. Back to the present. Karen had finished pouring the chemical on my poolside chairs. I watched in horror as the metal started to sizzle. She stood up, tossed the empty bottle over the fence like it was trash, and calmly walked back out the same side gate she broke into. 5 minutes later, police sirens screamed through the neighborhood. The officers jumped out, saw the damage, and I handed them my USB stick with the camera footage. "Do you recognize the woman?" the officer asked. "Oh, I recognize her all right. That's Karen Davis. She lives 3 houses down." She's also on the HOA board. The officer's eyes widened. You said you're not part of the HOA? Nope. Never signed. And she's been harassing me ever since I moved in. He nodded slowly, then looked at the pool. Sir, this water is now a biohazard. You'll need to drain it and replace the lining. I stared at him. That'll cost thousands. Don't worry. Once we arrest her and file charges, you'll have a solid case for restitution. Then his radio crackled. Suspect located. Bringing her in now. My pulse quickened. Was she really being arrested right now? I peeked through my blinds and saw her smiling and waving as they cuffed her. But that smile disappeared when they told her she was being charged with felony vandalism and environmental endangerment. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because 3 days later, I received a letter in my mailbox. No stamp. No address. Just a single line typed in bold. You should have joined the HOA. And taped to the bottom was a photo of my daughter Ellie playing by the mailbox. The moment I saw that photo taped to the letter, my stomach turned. It was a photo of my little girl, Ellie, standing by the red mailbox just 2 days ago, her backpack still on, her pink sneakers untied. And someone had clearly taken it from inside a car. The image was crisp, zoomed in, and printed on glossy paper. Not only had someone followed her, they wanted me to know it. I locked the door immediately and called the police again. It's gone beyond vandalism. This is a threat. The officer on the line tried to calm me down. You said the letter wasn't mailed. No return address. No postage. It was hand-delivered. And the photo of your daughter. Do you suspect the same woman from before? My voice cracked. Who else would do this? She's already poisoned my pool. The officer promised they'd send someone to dust the letter and photo for fingerprints. But I wasn't waiting for that. That night, I moved a small bed into the living room and stayed downstairs with a loaded flashlight and my dog Max by my side. Kathy and the kids stayed upstairs. I barely blinked all night. But morning brought more than just worry. It brought Karen's lawyer. At 9:03 a.m. sharp, a sleek black BMW pulled into my driveway. A tall man with slick back hair, a gray suit, and a clipboard stepped out. He rang the bell once, sharp and deliberate. I opened the door, half expecting another threat. Instead, he smiled. Good morning, Mr. Harris. I represent Mrs. Karen Davis. My name is Edward Mason. I said nothing. He continued, we're here to inform you that Karen is seeking a restraining order against you. I laughed out loud. Against me? She's the one who broke into my yard and dumped acid in my pool. Edward didn't flinch. Karen claims you've been harassing her since you moved in. She has documented emotional distress, alleged verbal abuse, and says you've placed hidden cameras to spy on her family. She was on my property committing a crime. He flipped a page on his clipboard. We're filing a countersuit as well. Defamation, emotional trauma, unsafe living conditions caused by your noncompliance with HOA regulations. You'll find the court documents in your mailbox by Monday. And just like that, he turned and left. Kathy was standing behind me in shock. She's trying to flip the script on us? I nodded slowly. This is war. Back when we first moved in, things weren't always this crazy. We'd found this property at the end of a cul-de-sac, one of the few homes in the neighborhood not tied to the HOA. That was a selling point for us. We didn't want people telling us what flowers we could plant or how many inches our trash bins should sit from the curb. But the moment we closed the deal, the HOA tried to suck us in. Karen showed up with cookies on day 2, but instead of welcome, she gave us a pamphlet titled, Why You Should Join Your Local HOA. We declined. She came back with a clipboard on day 4 just to check that we were keeping our grass trimmed to code. We declined again. By week 2, she was snapping pictures of our driveway, which we used to park our camper. I politely reminded her she had no jurisdiction over our land. And from that day on, she was a shadow over our home. She rallied the board against us, even tried to recruit our next-door neighbor, Todd, to persuade us. Todd was a nice guy, a little too passive, but friendly. One afternoon, he came over and said, Hey, buddy, Karen's asking if you'd consider a 1-year trial membership. Just so things don't get too tense around here, you know? Todd, I replied, you're a good guy. But I'm not buying into this cult. He nodded awkwardly and walked away. But now, after the pool, the floaties, the garbage, and the picture of Ellie, this wasn't just a neighborly dispute. It was a full-blown battlefield. I needed help. So I called a lawyer of my own. His name was Derek Shields, and he came highly recommended in the area. A former state prosecutor, now a bulldog for private citizens. When I explained the case to him, he shook his head. I've seen HOA pettiness before, but this? She's taking it way too far. I'll get that restraining order thrown out in one hearing. And the photo? He sighed. That might be the smoking gun. If we can trace it to her. Any evidence of surveillance on your kids? That's a felony. Then he smiled. But here's the twist. You said you had cameras, right? I nodded. 4. Plus motion sensors. Everything is backed up to the cloud. Good. Then let's burn her whole operation down. But before we could file our motion, another shock arrived. This time, it wasn't acidic. It wasn't a letter. It was a drone. Kathy was in the backyard reading a book, while Ellie splashed in a newly inflated kiddie pool. I was at the window sipping coffee when I heard a low buzzing sound. Then I saw it. A gray quadcopter hovered just above our fence, inside our property line. It dipped lower, camera lens tilting down, pointed directly at Kathy. I burst out the door. Hey, get that thing out of here. The drone swerved and zoomed straight up, vanishing over the tree line. But not before it broadcasted its return to home signal. Davis home. I checked the saved footage. My camera had caught the drone launching from Karen's front lawn. We called the sheriff's office. This time, they took it seriously. The same officer who arrested Karen the first time came to our door. You said she filed a restraining order, right? Yep. And then flew a drone with a camera onto your property? Yep. He exhaled. That's called civil harassment. Plus, violation of FAA rules. If she used that drone for surveillance, we can charge her. He made a few notes, asked for a copy of my footage, then said something I didn't expect. We're going to issue a search warrant for her property. My heart jumped. Seriously? She's escalating, and now she's targeting your kids. We've got enough, especially with the chemical attack footage. And with that, the case took a massive turn. But what they found at her house, that changed everything. Because tucked in her garage, behind a rack of seasonal wreaths and gardening tools, was a whiteboard. And written in black marker were 3 chilling words. Make a move. Underneath a list of methods. Fence sabotage, pool damage, HOA violations, property harassment, family pressure, and #6, send the drone. The whiteboard. It sat there like a blueprint for madness. The sheriff took one look at it and said, this isn't just harassment. This is premeditated criminal behavior. Each line was marked with a checkbox, and most were already ticked off in red. Fence sabotage, pool damage, HOA violations, family pressure, send the drone. But the most disturbing part wasn't what had already been done. It was what came next. Line number 7. Contact CPS anonymously. I froze. Kathy clutched her chest. She was going to call Child Protective Services on us? The sheriff nodded grimly. Looks that way. It's a common tactic for aggressive HOA groups trying to force residents out. Fake complaints about child neglect, hoping the fear alone will make people leave. I couldn't believe it. This was beyond personal. Karen wasn't just trying to annoy us anymore. She wanted us gone. I leaned closer to the whiteboard. In the corner was a sticky note. Deadline, June 30th. The board must approve sale or full eviction. My voice was low. She gave herself a deadline. The sheriff pulled out his phone. This changes everything. I'll have to escalate the case to our Special Investigations Unit. We weren't just dealing with a nosy neighbor anymore. We were dealing with organized HOA warfare. When the police left, Kathy and I sat on the couch in silence. Even Max, our golden retriever, seemed tense. He laid at Kathy's feet, ears twitching at every sound. I turned to her and said, we've got 2 options. We fight this with everything we've got, or we put the for sale sign in the yard and run. She didn't hesitate. We fight. And that's when my lawyer, Derek, called. Good news, he said. The judge reviewed Karen's restraining order request. It's already been dismissed. No grounds. But here's the kicker. I filed our harassment suit this morning. And with what the sheriff just found, you'll win this case without breaking a sweat. Then his voice changed. But there's something else. What? I dug into the HOA's registration filings. The subdivision you live in? Your house was exempt, as you already know. But guess who changed the digital version of the zoning map last year? Karen. Bingo. She submitted a fake update to the neighborhood bylaws and emailed it to the county's online portal. Your house is listed as within HOA bounds now, but only digitally. The physical records still show you're outside. My jaw dropped. She forged zoning records? That's a felony. We're going to hit her with that too. Over the next few days, the tension around the neighborhood grew. Some of the other neighbors, once friendly, began avoiding eye contact. Todd, the neighbor who once brought cookies, now barely waved. A few others stopped letting their kids play near our yard. Karen had clearly started a whisper campaign. Kathy came home from the grocery store looking defeated. I saw Karen talking to the cashier. Then suddenly people stopped smiling at me. She's spreading lies. I hugged her. We'll clear our name. We've got the truth. But it didn't stop the HOA from sending a fine notice to our mailbox. A fine for a non-HOA home. It read, "This is an official notice. Your property has failed to meet lawn maintenance codes. You are fined $480. Failure to comply will result in additional action." The nerve. I printed out a copy of our property deed, circled the section stating we were exempt, and taped it to the HOA clubhouse door. I also made 20 flyers with the headline, "We are not HOA. We will never be HOA. Stop harassing my family." I put them in every neighbor's mailbox. I knew Karen would hate it, and she did, because 2 nights later, the cameras caught her sneaking around our front yard, pulling the flyers out of people's mailboxes and shoving them in a trash bag. Illegal. And again, caught on tape. We turned the footage in to the sheriff. Derek added mail tampering to the growing case file. By now, Karen had 5 charges against her: criminal trespass, felony vandalism, environmental endangerment, harassment, mail tampering. But she wasn't done. Not even close. Because the very next morning, I found my truck had been keyed. 3 long lines. Deep. Across both sides. The paint job ruined. And sitting under the windshield wiper was a single pink HOA brochure, written in red marker across the front. This would have never happened if you just joined. I marched straight to the HOA clubhouse, camera in hand. Karen was there with 3 other board members, sipping coffee like it was just another sunny day. I didn't yell. I just said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I've got a lawyer, I've got police reports, and I've got more evidence than you can imagine. This ends now." Karen stood up, lips curled into a tight smile. "Careful, Mr. Harris. You wouldn't want your family dragged into something messy." I stared at her. "You already did. But here's the thing. I'm not scared of you anymore." As I turned to leave, she whispered, "You should be." 2 days later, it was court day. Karen was brought in through a side entrance. Her attorney, Mr. Slickhair Edward Mason, argued that she was under extreme stress and felt targeted by an aggressive newcomer who refused to assimilate. Derek stood and calmly listed every charge. Then he played the camera footage. All of it. In a packed courtroom. Karen is pouring chemicals. Karen smirks at the camera. Karen pulling flyers. Karen launching her drone. The entire room was silent. And then Derek delivered the knockout punch. We also have evidence that Mrs. Davis attempted to falsify zoning maps to force the Harris family under HOA control, an illegal act that violates state law and county records regulations. The judge leaned forward. "Is this true?" Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She glanced at Edward, who avoided eye contact. The judge spoke with force. "Then I'm placing a temporary injunction on Mrs. Davis. She is to cease all HOA activity, stay 200 feet from the Harris property, and appear for a criminal hearing in 3 weeks. Karen tried to speak, but the judge cut her off. "Ma'am, you're lucky I'm not jailing you today." We left the courthouse with heads high. Neighbors were waiting outside. Some clapped. Others apologized. Even Todd patted my shoulder and said, "Didn't know she went that far. You were right to stand up to her." It felt like the tide was turning. But just when we thought we had peace. That night, around 2 a.m., we woke up to the blaring sound of our home alarm. Motion detected. Back porch. I rushed to the monitor and saw someone in a hoodie. But this time it wasn't Karen. It was someone else from the HOA board, holding a red gas can, and he was pouring it onto our deck. The image on the screen didn't feel real. A man in a gray hoodie, face obscured by shadows, was standing on our back deck, with a red gas can tilted over, pouring liquid right where our patio furniture sat. I blinked hard and looked again. It wasn't Karen this time. It was Rick Sheldon, the HOA's treasurer. The same man who smiled and offered my daughter cookies last Halloween. My chest tightened. My fingers flew across the keypad as I slammed the panic button on our wall. The alarm screeched louder. Lights outside began flashing, and Max, our golden retriever, started barking like mad from the living room. But Rick didn't run. He just calmly turned, dropped the gas can, and walked away. Like he knew exactly what he was doing. Like he wanted to be seen. The cops arrived in under 6 minutes. I showed them the footage. They walked around the back deck, sniffed the air, then nodded grimly. "Yep, that's gasoline. If you hadn't set that alarm off, your deck would have gone up in flames." Kathy stood behind me in a robe, holding Ellie, who was trembling. "They're trying to burn our house down now." The officer knelt gently next to Ellie. "Hey, sweetheart. You're safe. Nobody's getting near you again, okay?" But I knew the truth. We weren't safe. Not until the whole HOA was exposed for what it had become. Rick Sheldon was arrested that same morning. But his smugness didn't fade. When they walked him to the patrol car, he shouted, "We just wanted peace in the neighborhood. They don't belong here." His words echoed through the quiet dawn. A few neighbors peeked through curtains. Some recorded with their phones. Others turned away. I looked up and saw Karen watching from her upstairs window, arms folded, smiling. She wasn't done. The following day, my lawyer Derek called. "We're filing for an emergency protective order," he said. "This goes beyond harassment. This is arson. You need full legal shielding now." I nodded. "Done. Do it." Then he added, "And there's more." Of course, there was. He emailed me a link. A private Facebook group made by the HOA. The name? Preserve Lakefield Traditions. The content? Post about us. Photos. Comments like, "If they won't leave, we'll make them." This is our neighborhood. Outsiders don't get to change the rules. We should host a welcome party with Karen's special recipe. Someone should drain their pool again. They love surprises. My head throbbed as I scrolled. They weren't just a committee. They were a cult. A small, tight circle of 6 board members with absolute control and 0 boundaries. I screenshot every comment and forwarded it to the sheriff. He responded with just 2 words, "We're watching." But things didn't slow down. 2 nights later, Brandon's bike was stolen from the garage. A week after that, we found nails scattered across our driveway. And then, the real punch in the gut. Our mailbox was smashed to pieces, with a note shoved in the rubble. Final warning. You don't belong here. At that point, I wasn't just defending my home. I was preparing for battle. We installed even more cameras, extra floodlights, reinforced the back door. My brother, a former Marine, sent over a top-tier motion detector system with infrared capabilities. I also met with a local news reporter. Her name was Sarah Benton, and she'd been itching to expose shady HOAs for months. She agreed to meet at a coffee shop off the neighborhood path. When I showed her everything, pictures, videos, court records, social media screenshots, her jaw dropped. "This is organized domestic terrorism," she said. "And it's happening in a picture-perfect American suburb." She promised to run a story by the weekend. We shook hands. But the moment I walked back to my truck, I saw it. a flyer stuck to the windshield, printed in bold red font. "Silence is safety. Your family depends on it." And scrawled across the bottom in handwriting I recognized instantly, Karen. I showed the flyer to Derek. He exhaled deeply. "She's lost it. But you're going to get the last word. I promise." He was right, because the sheriff called later that afternoon. They'd gotten a warrant to seize HOA internal records, emails, messages, financial statements. And guess what they found? An unauthorized special assessment fund. A slush pile of over $40,000 collected from HOA members. And it was being used for compliance projects. What kind of projects? Repainting fences without permission, hiring off-the-books security to patrol non-HOA homes, buying surveillance drones, and possibly paying Rick Sheldon for that gasoline job. The HOA was funding its own private war, and Karen was the ringleader. I walked into the next town hall meeting with a flash drive and a folder full of evidence. Sarah Benton and her cameraman were right behind me, recording everything. The board members were seated at the front like royalty. Karen stood the moment she saw me. "This is a private meeting," she sneered. "Not anymore," I said. "I have full approval from county law enforcement. And so does the press." People in the audience gasped. I opened the folder and started placing photos, receipts, quotes, and screenshots on the table one by one. Then I played the video of Rick pouring gasoline on my porch. The room went dead silent. Finally, Sarah stepped forward. "This story airs at 6 p.m. tonight." Karen's hands trembled. "This is a smear job. He's making this up." A woman from the audience stood. "Karen, is it true you tried to have their kids taken away?" Karen paled. Then Todd, our former fence-sitter of a neighbor, stood up and shouted, "My HOA dues paid for this." "Are you kidding me?" Everything broke loose. People are shouting, chair scraping, a man tossing his HOA badge on the ground. I'm done with this joke. The meeting ended in chaos. And Karen? She slipped out the back door like a coward. But later that night, a fire broke out at the HOA clubhouse. The flames were massive, visible from every corner of the neighborhood. By the time firefighters arrived, the entire building was reduced to smoldering ashes. Nobody was hurt, but one thing was found buried under the rubble: a melted drone frame and a half-burned file labeled Operation Removal. And beside it a photo of my house, with a big red X drawn across it. The fire department ruled the blaze at the HOA clubhouse as arson. And somehow, no cameras caught the culprit. No witnesses. No fingerprints. No clear trail. But someone left a message, spray painted in red across the back wall of the scorched building. "If I go down, I'm taking everyone with me, K." The news crews had a field day. By 8 a.m., our neighborhood was on every local station. And at 8:07 a.m., Karen Davis was officially arrested. Again. Only this time, it wasn't just for vandalism or harassment. She was charged with arson, conspiracy to commit fraud, misappropriation of HOA funds, endangering minors, attempted coercion by a CPS threat, forgery of zoning documents, and perhaps the most serious of all, organizing a community harassment ring under the guise of HOA authority. Kathy cried when she heard. But not because she was sad, because she was finally relieved. I held her tightly. "We're getting our lives back." But just as we were catching our breath, Derek called. His tone was serious. "Matt." Karen flipped. "What?" She gave a full confession, and she named names. I gripped the phone tighter. "Who?" "All 6 board members." She claims they were all part of the operation. But most shocking, she says someone else was behind the entire idea to begin with. She called him the architect. My heart dropped. "Who the hell is the architect?" Derek replied, her words, not mine. "He's the man who taught us how to scare people legally. He told us how to forge documents, file HOA claims, and make it all look legitimate." He continued, "And guess what, Matt? He doesn't live in your neighborhood. He doesn't even live in this state." We dug deeper. With help from Sarah Benton, the reporter, we traced the architect to a man named Miles Granger, a retired HOA consultant who had been quietly running online seminars on strategic neighborhood control. Basically, a playbook for HOA bullies. In one video, he said, "The fastest way to cleanse a neighborhood is to make the non-compliant families want to leave. You don't evict them, you corner them." Karen had been his student, and now she had turned on him. Derek immediately sent the footage and records to the FBI, because at this point, it wasn't just our family. It was about dozens of neighborhoods across the country that had fallen victim to Miles' teachings. But while the legal machine spun behind the scenes, we had one more battle to fight: our pool. The chemical damage had seeped deeper than we thought. The lining was ruined, and worse, the acid had corroded the filter system. The contractor quoted us $28,000 to replace everything. Insurance denied the full claim, said it fell under chemical vandalism, which they argued wasn't fully covered under our plan. I was furious. But then, something incredible happened. Todd, yes, Todd, the once fence sitter, knocked on our door holding an envelope. He smiled sheepishly. A few of us pitched in. Inside was a check, $7,000, signed by 23 families. "We're sorry we didn't speak up sooner," he said. "But now we're taking the neighborhood back. Karen doesn't own this place anymore." And they meant it. The HOA collapsed. New board elections were held. Every former member who supported Karen was barred from running. The clubhouse was never rebuilt. Instead, the lot was converted into a community garden, something Kathy had wanted since we moved in. Sarah Benton's story aired nationwide under the title, "The Suburban War: One Family's Fight Against a Rogue HOA." Overnight, we went from victims to examples. And finally, after months of anxiety and stress, we started living again. The kids laughed louder. Max barked happily chasing squirrels. Kathy planted flowers, and I rebuilt the pool myself, with help from neighbors, veterans, and even a few teenagers who wanted to learn construction. We laid new tile, painted a fresh deck, and upgraded every security camera. The first time Ellie jumped back in the pool, she shouted, "It feels like it never happened." But I knew better. It did happen, and we survived it. One last thing. Weeks after Karen was sentenced to 7 years in state prison and placed under lifetime HOA restrictions, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, no postage, just a sticky note inside. It read, "They're everywhere, and they're not done." Attached was a blurry photo of another neighborhood, another house, and another man standing in his backyard holding a flyer that said, "Join the HOA or else." Underneath it, scribbled in shaky ink, "Run while you can." I replayed the voicemail over and over. The voice was warped, distorted, barely human. "You silenced one architect, but there are more, and we remember your name." Who was that? Another copycat? One of Granger's old recruits? A bored hacker trying to mess with me? Or worse, a real believer, part of the next generation of HOA extremists? Kathy found me outside, standing alone, staring into the distance. "You heard something," she said. I nodded. Not from Granger, but from someone else. Someone watching. She didn't flinch. She just said, "Then let them watch. We're not hiding anymore." In the days that followed, I handed the voicemail over to Agent Daniel Keyes and the FBI. Their tech team ran voice analysis and digital tracebacks. What they found was chilling. The call had bounced through 6 international proxies, masking its origin. The audio had been fed through voice manipulation software used in deepfake operations. "It's professionally done," Daniel admitted. "This wasn't a prank. Whoever did this knows what they're doing." Any leads? We're cross-referencing the sound signature with recent HOA-related incidents. But Matt, this isn't just one man anymore. It's a movement. Meanwhile, NOHOA neighborhood owners holding off aggression exploded in popularity. We launched a national database of HOA abuse cases, offering legal templates, support groups, and even a hotline. One retired judge volunteered to lead regional legal clinics. A whistleblower from another HOA board came forward with a flash drive full of emails connecting 6 more states to Granger's teachings. The Department of Justice formed a task force. Senators held hearings titled, "When Neighborhood Power Turns Predatory, HOA Abuse in America." And every time a victim testified, I saw myself in their story. Then, one morning, I got a package on my porch. It had no postage, no return address. Inside, a black binder with a gold emblem. The words embossed on it, HOA Elite, Phase 2. I opened it slowly. The first page read, "Confidential Planning Guide for Tier 2 Enforcement. Strictly for board presidents and regional enforcers." The chapters included misinformation campaigns, leveraging social shame and religious pressure, pet policy loopholes for forced entry, monetizing non-members through civil penalties. I flipped to the last page. It had my name, typed, underlined. Harris must be neutralized through legal exhaustion or online discreditation. Avoid martyrdom at all costs. My blood turned cold. We handed the binder to federal agents immediately. It turned out to be real. One of our neighbors had found it discarded in the bushes behind their fence, left behind by someone running from a drone patrol. Except this drone didn't belong to us. It belonged to another HOA from across the county. They had been watching us, monitoring our town hall meetings, tracking who was talking, and leaking names to other HOA radicals online. Agent Keys told us something I'll never forget. This isn't just about rules anymore. It's ideology, a belief that neighborhoods should be run like mini-states, where the loudest board member becomes the law, and they see you as the rebel. So I leaned into the role. I started touring the country. I spoke at town halls, schools, even city councils. HOAs are not the enemy, I told them. But unchecked power always is. We passed new legislation in our state called the Neighborhood Rights Act, a law that forced HOAs to clearly disclose their powers, limits, and gave homeowners the right to opt out without retaliation. Karen's name became a case study. Granger's seminars were officially labeled as hate propaganda. And most importantly, HOA victims who had been silent for years finally had a voice. 1 year later, we held a national rally called Take Back the Neighborhood in Washington, D.C. Thousands came. Some brought signs. "I'm not a violation. We own our homes, not you. Cameras don't scare me anymore." Kathy stood on the stage with me. Ellie and Brandon sat on our shoulders. I stepped up to the microphone and said, "A neighbor is someone who brings you soup when you're sick, not a fine. A community is built on trust, not threats. And power, real power, isn't in the rulebook. It's in how you treat the people around you." The crowd roared. That night, as we flew home, I looked out the window of the plane. The neighborhoods below looked peaceful, quiet, just rooftops, driveways, swing sets. But I knew better. I knew that hidden among those rooftops were still people who believed they were kings of a cul-de-sac, generals of their subdivisions, rulers of the mailbox. And maybe they were still plotting, still watching. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because now, I wasn't just a homeowner. I was a fighter. And every single person they tried to silence was now standing beside me.